most of my colleagues are coming in. Welcome, everybody. It's a great pleasure to host Filippo di Mauro and the CompNet network. I've participated in this network when I was still working in Lithuania. It was at that time what seemed to be an extremely courageous initiative, which was that of gathering nationally harmonized statistics of firms. So looking at productivity, looking at firm entry and exit, looking at trades, looking at investment, most of the time was very complicated in a cross-country setting because variables were not defined in the same way. So a lot of things that seemed to be interesting insights were just caused by different definitions and so on and so forth. So what CompNet managed to do was to create a framework in which individual countries felt safe to share aggregate statistics of their firm level data. And this spurred truly a wave of research, which can be seen on the CompNet network and on the respective central banks participant websites. A wave of research related to a lot of topics that are relevant not only in a macro setting, but also in financial stability and so on and so forth. So it's great to have Filippo with us today. Filippo is going to talk to us a little bit about the network, and also he's going to show us some of the things that I think are very relevant. So, in a sense, once this war stops and we start thinking about reconstruction, what are optimal paths, if you want to say so, on convergence, productivity convergence at the firm level. So beyond just macro settings, we want to understand also how firms and industry evolve. Of course, none of the countries that are in the data set have suffered war and destruction, so the results are not comparable, but I think some ingredients are there for us to understand what makes some economies grow faster to EU average productivity and so on and so forth. Filippo, the screen is yours. We generally take very brief clarification questions if needed during the presentation, and we leave more substantial discussion towards the end.
So thank you very much, Minea, and thank you very much for the colleagues that are in front. Actually, so my name is Filippo di Mauro. I'm the founder and chair of the Competitiveness Research Network that, in fact, was founded when I was at the European Central Bank. So is a central banker talking to central bankers. At that time, actually, we created this network. That was the early 2010, because the bank was involved in transformation in structural programs in Spain, in Greece. But we found out that as a central bank, we didn't really have much of a clue of what is an analysis of structure policies. And therefore, we started the firm level collection that Minea was mentioning. So, and eventually this became the fashion, and now is obvious to everybody that a firm level view is absolutely needed also for central banks. Before starting that, actually, Minea, just to make the thing more lively, first of all, I mean, a big, what can I say, thank you for having accepted this invitation that Minea, proposed. I'm very happy to be talking to you, and of course, let me mention a huge sign of solidarity for what you, your family, and your country is actually getting through these days. So again, full solidarity. And really, I hope that what we are going to discuss today can be of some use for you. I really hope so. But before starting, I wanted just to have a sense of who I have in front of me, because I see a lot of interesting names in my screen. I don't know, maybe you turn on 1 second your camera just to make the thing as lively as possible, because, just to have a sense of what is the audience. And also, if I can know, okay, these are all central bank colleagues, or who am I talking to? Right?
Yeah.
Just one second.
So I'll
Sorry,
just, no
Sorry,
problem,
guys.
Of course, it's very good. So I'll just very briefly mention that we have Sergei Nikolaichuk, who's our board member. We have Volodymyr Lepushinsky, who's the director director of the monetary policy. We have Olga Pogarska. We have a lot of colleagues from monetary policy and forecasting, from modeling. Most of them, if not all, I can't say this for sure, but I think almost all are from the National Bank of Ukraine.
Okay, okay, very good, very good. So well, then, again, this is just the start of the conversation. It's supposed to be something that to kick off a possible collaboration. Again, Minea will be at our conference next week in Luxembourg. This, I mean, is just a start. So what I'm going to do is a bit of, it's not an academic presentation today. It's more like a presentation of the network, understanding what, what we do, what data we have. And I will present 3 applications. So I will try to have right now just maybe a 25 minutes presentation, and then we can have some discussion to figure out how we go from there, right? Let me share the screen. So again, so what I'm going to do is basically, trying to be helpful to you. For sure, you have amazing challenges in front of you, joining the EU, thinking about reconstructions. And of course, what I'm going to try to do today is indicate how the component data set, which is a EU-wide data set, firm level based, was used by us to do structural policy analysis, and how possibly can be used, inspire you to maybe join in our efforts and compare your results and your policies using our methodologies. So I will give you, as I said, 3 examples of applications of our data set, and I illustrated generally before that how it works. So first of all, a bit of a, sorry for a bit starting with a bit of a notional kind of slide, but I think is a reminder for everybody. Why firm level perspective is important? Well, the firm level perspective is important because of the chart that you see in front of you, which is the productivity distribution, labor productivity distribution in France between 2001 and 2012. What you see is that firm performance is very dispersed and asymmetric. And rather than having actually an average performance, what you have is that you have on the left-hand side lots of firms which have a very low productivity, and only a few on the right side of this shape that are actually the most effective, the most productive. So what the economists and the policies are trying to do is to make sure that as we evolve, not only the average productivity goes on, but also that the thickness of the right-hand side become thicker. So, and this is what's happening in France, in fact, over time. So that's good news, right? So that's the reason why it's important to use firm level information. What is the problem when we use aggregate information? Aggregate information, the average is under the false assumption that there is that we are actually having a representative firms which is really representing the whole economy. The reality, however, is that if we use this kind of hypothesis, we have only partial information, and maybe we are bound to give incomplete and possibly faulty policy recommendations. So that's the reason and underlying fashion why we stress the fact that understanding the underlying distribution is very, very important over and above the averages of that us as macroeconomists tend to use normally. So the component data set is an aggregate data set of about 20 EU countries, and we put it up to overcome the issue of confidentiality and comparability of the balance sheet information which is available across Europe. Let me mention how this is done. We have, I said 19 countries in the 9 vintage. There are going to be 23 in 2020, in the vintage that we are starting just right now. How does it work? Well, we have data providers, which are national statistical institutes, national central banks, governmental research institutions. They have at their disposal their micro information, firm level data. And what we do is they run the codes for us on their best existing national data set. So in a sense, there is a very economical way of going about it, because they don't need to take costly additional data collections, but they use the data that they have, the best that they have. These data are harmonized and the codes are run individually, so we don't see the data, the raw data. So the statisticians that are listening to us, don't be worried. The confidentiality is fully guaranteed. What we get in return are aggregated information at a sector level, which is, however, much richer than just the average, because we have the entire distribution of all the variables. The countries that are represented are below, and we have various aggregation level, country, macro sector, 60 sectors, and we have also regional. So within countries, we have also regions. Now, the data set can be classified, can be actually seen as having 5 main categories. We have productivity indicators, labor productivity, total factor productivity, firm size, financial indicators. So we have investment ratio, cash holdings, trade variables such as export, and other characteristics of exports, competition indicators, so we know the extent in which the markets are concentrated, the Herfindahl index, for instance, and labor indicators, such as we know how the firms are evolving in terms of employment over the years, if they're getting bigger or smaller, and so on. Now, what we do is we add constantly new variables. For instance, we added previously indicators of zombie firms, and we have also added the regional dimension, and we keep adding, a small amount of new variables, but certainly we do this over the year. What is important in our data set is that not only we have a distribution of individual variables, but we have also what we call joint distributions. For instance, we have joint distribution of the labor productivity versus credit constraints, or labor productivity versus wages. So, for instance, we can respond to questions such as, are low productive firms in a country sector characterized by higher credit constraints, or are the most productive also the ones that are providing the higher wages, and so on and so forth. So it's so that just the stylized facts of our data set provide a lot of very important information. We have been doing lots of research of that and developed quite a bit of literature. The most recent paper is actually with Melitz of Harvard University, published in the Journal of European Economic Association. I'm proud to have actually just published with Professor Altomonto Bocconi a book on economics of firm productivity. So if you want to look into that, you will see lots of examples of our data set applications. Now, this is the component data set as so for the 20 or 23 countries that we have. So it's a kind of minimum common denominator, if you want. So there are the variables are not very, the data sets is not very granular, but is available for 23 countries. So it allows a lot of comparative work. So we have been working on is a second data set in the last couple of years, which is basically much more granular and is done for 6 countries only, for which we have better data. So we hope actually that for Ukraine, we can do, in fact, this kind of more granular analysis. How does it work? We have the business registers data as the center, and these data are linked with a number of surveys which are already existing in the Eurostat. And the idea is to develop analysis which allows us to give some information, more information on the dimension of productivity versus use of intangible investments and international operations. So we link business register with international trade statistics, international sources data, foreign affiliates, so the GVC part, and then with the structure of business statistics, the information, community information service, and ICT use, and so on. So you can see that this is a very granular data set just for and we create a metadata set on that. What we do is we run this for the period of 2007-2017, and we have by now 6 countries which are involved. And the idea is that out of this metadata set, which have been homogenized for this, much more granular data set, we can run periodically specific codes to use such variables, right? So the idea of this micro data infrastructure, MDI, the architecture is the following. The researcher comes with the research project and code goes to the component MDI network, and then the MDI network and component has contact with the statistical institutes, prepare the metadata, and basically runs the codes in two fashion. On the one hand, when we have direct access to the data, we do it ourselves. For France and the Netherlands, we can do this, or we ask the statistical institute to run as the normal component dataset does in remote. The output, again, is going to be an aggregate output, a sectorial aggregated that can be used for publication and research. Now, this is extremely valuable because, as I said, as soon as we have this system, and this is already available for 6 countries, we can run on this data set periodically specific codes. So this is, the dream of every economist right now. So basically having the perfect data set, homogenized ex ante, that quick be used at request. Okay, so what is the conclusion of this, my first part? So that we have granular data sets which are essential to tackle issues such as market power and productivity prospect. But, as we know in Europe, access is de facto limited. And the component has done this work to, via the micro aggregated information, to actually solve the issue of the confidentiality, and has worked a lot in the last 10 years or so to improve cross-country comparability. We have spent lots of time and resources to make so we are for sure the best data set in town in terms of comparability. So again, this is an issue that the Ukrainian colleagues have to take into consideration. Please join us on that. Now, let me do now 3 applications, quick applications on this data set, just to give you a sense of what we can do, what kind of data we have, or what we can do for that. The first application is related to productivity convergence in Eastern Europe. This is born by the fact that Minea, as we discussed this talk today, said, wow, the convergence is very important. So what I did was, with one other economist, figuring out what we could say about it. So it's just very, initial information, but I think it can provide you something useful. So we did it just in the last few days. So we use for analysis of the convergence in Eastern Europe, the sample of over 20 employees in the 8th vintage, and we have in the data set or component, we have quite a bit of Eastern European countries. We have, depending on, with different date of accession to the EU. So in this data set that I'm considering right now, we have Croatia that joined in 2012, Romania, 2005, and then Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, and Lithuania, which joined in 2003. So what we do is we investigate the convergence between Eastern Europe and the average of the whole EU, the 27 countries, in 2 dimensions. First, GDP per capita, and second, level productivity. Okay, on GDP per capita, there is not really much we can say. You see that the higher the GDP per capita is the curve for all EU, and the lower is the Eastern Europe. You can see that there is not really convergence going on. These are Eurostat data. It looks like that is entirely parallel. Both regions have identical trend of GDP per capita. So, and this is also true by individual countries. Maybe some has some, Lithuania maybe looks like has a slightly higher, but it doesn't really look at that there is so much of a GDP per capita convergence, right? Now, instead, if we look into the labor productivity, and these are using the data of Compenet, well, the situation is different because some convergence, particularly starting 2010 on, is actually going on, right? Also because basically the EU 27 is entirely stagnant, right? But again, convergence is taking place. And if you look at the country level, in fact, it's actually generalized on all countries, with possibly the exception of Croatia and Slovakia. The rest is actually converging rather clearly, right? So again, a good result that we can offer to you just by drawing our data set, in terms of a first stylized fact. Convergence in labor productivity is actually happening. Now, how do we look, what else we can say with our data set? Well, we can look at the distribution. I said that the distribution of productivity is very important. And look at the distribution of productivity for all EU 27. Well, it shows that it's stagnant. It's stagnant in terms of level of average, but also in terms of shape. It doesn't move. I mean, it's really, we have a problem in all EU 27 in terms of labor productivity. That's obvious. Instead, something is going on for Eastern Europe, because you can see that, in fact, the curve not only shifted to the right, the average, but also shift the thickness, So it's getting, we have more firms getting among the best. So that's very good, right? So that's the, hopefully Ukraine, as soon as we can see the data, will show the same thing. Maybe you are the first in the class of that. I don't know, we'll see. But, again, these are just stylized facts that we can gather just drawing from the box of the company data set. Okay, let me do another example. Intangibles and productivity. So as you know, there is a lot of discussion on intangibles. So these are intangible investments are everything that is not tangible, is not capital accumulation, is research and development, is ICT development, is marketing. All these things that are intangible are part of the richness of the wealth of the firm, but is not really in the statistics too much, right? It's only partially in the statistics. So what we do is we have a paper going on in preparation on that, and we use in this 3 or 4 slides, I'm going to use both the component data set and the MDI data set, the more granular data set that we have. We have started with this project with 2 policy research questions. On the one hand, understanding whether intangible investments is associated with the best in the class. So with higher profits, with the firm size, and say the largest firms, and with the firms which are the best, the highest in productivity. So what is the reconnection? Is it so that the larger the firm, the larger his productivity, the larger are intangible investment? That's the first research question. And the second research question is, how does it interact this with firm concentration? Does it mean that when we have more intangible, we are going to have more firm concentration and therefore market power and some inefficiency in the system? So we do this beforehand by looking at what kind of metrics we have to look into intangibles. So I will do 2 things: responding to the 2 research questions, just give you a first sense of what the results are, and also giving you a sense of how we proxy intangible assets in the 2 component data sets, right? So when we start with the MDI, the more granular data set, we have quite a bit of information about intangibles, and we use it as complements. So we have investment in concessions, perpetual inventory method that we use, estimated intangible assets. We have innovation organization capital from an innovation survey. We use the share of personnel using computers. This comes from the ICT survey, and we have the R&D intensity. So we have, as I mentioned before, lots of surveys are existing, and we use them as a complement to understand more overall what is the role of intangible investment. As far as component, instead, the general data set is concerned, we have only one proxy, which is in the balance sheet. On the asset side, we have a kind of a definition, which is intangible assets. So we use this. It's very aggregated, done, included in the balance sheet. So let's look into the broad sense of the data in the two data sets. So if we start by looking at the broader picture, and we use for that the component data set, the more, the minimum common denominator, the more general data set, we can see that there is quite a clear positive correlation between real intangible fixed assets and labor productivity. So as expected, and this is true by sector and by country, right? So that's the first result. Now, oops, sorry about that. So now we go into looking into more detail on the country level and checking in the percentile of the distribution of the use of intangible investment by country. These are 18 countries of the company data set for which we have data. One result comes out very clearly. Although there is a positive correlation between intangible and productivity, the fact of what you have is that intangibles are in fact only available, in the balance sheet of very large firms, or say on the right-hand side of the distribution. For all countries, you can see is that there is a number only, on the right-hand side. This is true for all the countries. Maybe some country, Italy has more, a distribution. For certain countries, is very extreme. Czech Republic, look at Finland, and so on. So that's clear. There is a lots of concentration or ownership in the distribution of the intangible capital. So only the top firms invest high share of their revenue in intangible assets. That's the message, right? Now let's use the more granular data set, MDI. As I said, there are several indicators. Well, here the picture is more mixed. It's not necessarily so that only the largest, only the right-hand side. This is true. If we use the innovation index, we have the same information. So that's a kind of a warning to say, let's be careful, because it depends how you define intangible as well. So this is clear. Now, what is the connection now between intangible and market power? Is it so that, the larger firms, so the ones that have use of intangible, are also sort of bringing about more concentration in the markets, in revenue? Well, if you look into this picture, of say real intangible fixed asset versus Hirschman index of concentration, yes, you see a positive correlation between intangible use and more concentration. But if you look into markup, actually it's not the case. So, the jury is still out. We know that there is quite a bit of a concentration in the use of intangible, but is this correlated with markups increasing? Not really. If we look at the component data set, the general data set, the information instead is much more clear in terms of saying that there is a bit of a distortion of the competitive environment. If we use instead the more granular data set, here what we have done for France and the Netherlands, for which we have data, we have looked at at the profit concentration, in two cases, for the total economy, the blue line, and the knowledge-intensive sectors. You can see very clearly that from 2013 or so, the knowledge-intensive sectors have a dramatic increase in concentration in profits, and this is true for France, but even more so for the Netherlands. So again, the issue is intangible assets are a key variable, but there is an issue of there is a challenge in terms of how we measure these intangible assets, because the results can be different depending upon what kind of definition we use. We certainly know that the intensity in intangible assets is associated with better performance, profits, more productivity, higher size, and so on, particularly for top firms. Now, whether this brings about a non-functioning market, so a degree of not perfect competition, so therefore generation of market power, is still something that we need to look into, that although the MDI evidence of profit concentration for the Netherlands and France are rather strong. So again, the jury is out.
Filippo, I have a very, very quick question here. Perhaps you
Of
can
course.
speculate, because it was not part of the research, but in any case, so you showed us the distribution shifting in France from 2010 to 2016 and so on and so forth. And the big question for us is, even this one, you can just keep it here. When you started off, you showed the aggregate distribution shifting for the entire economy. And the question is very much related to, are firms investing in tangibles after they become productive, or do they invest in tangibles and therefore they become productive, shifting the distribution? Yeah.
No, of course. This is something that the causality is still not there, right? So we're working on that, but the evidence is very clear that intangible is a story really of the largest firms. And in fact, what we need to figure out is why so, right? So is there why is the innovation not going through to the rest of the economy, right? And in fact, what we do in other research is to figure out whether, again, market power or some form of monopsony in the labor market has created some form of inefficient distribution or circulation, if you want, of the innovation across the economy. In fact, actually, Minea, I think that in fact my last kind of application on firm dynamism, in fact, I can provide you with a bit of initial response of what you were saying, right? So what we have been doing, and then again, I'll take another 3 minutes or 4 for that. So it's looking into the business dynamism in Europe, right? How we define business dynamism? Well, it's the sum of job creation and destruction in the EU. What we know is that, and this is the first stylized fact that comes from this chart, is horrendous. You can see that business dynamism in Europe, from the year 2000 until these days, is actually declining, and very, very, very strongly. If we accept maybe Switzerland, there is a lot of firm, job destruction creating that, but you can see that business dynamism is really declining. So lots of less job are created and lots of less job are distracted, meaning that the system is somehow stuck, right? Which could be one contributing factor, as Binea was hinting, for the slowdown in innovation. I mean, so this is actually a reflection. There is innovation not spreading, also because there is not really much going on in terms of dynamism of the firms. Now, if we go down to other topics which are related to that, is also not only business dynamism is declining, but also the entry of the new firm is declining. This is also true to all countries. So the share of young firms over the economy is actually declining invariably for all countries. Maybe again, exception are Netherlands, Spain, but the trends are very, very clear. The entry is becoming very difficult. Now, overall, also what there is that the young firms are becoming less important. And we have on the left-hand side, you can see there are all these charts related to the share of employment in young firms, which is declining. And also what is actually preoccupying is that this is true for all categories of firms, depending upon how big they are. So for any across the board, all size classes show that the share of young firms is actually declining. So again, this is not very good news, right? So what we have been doing is looking into a bit deeper into that, just to understand, if we could have some hint about what's going on. For that, we use sort of the analysis that was done by Decker and others, 2020 for the United States, regressing labor growth on fixed effects, total factor productivity, and lagged employment, right? So what it shows is that it's confirming the thing that also in America are going on, which is firm adjust the labor force more slowly than before. You can see here that if we regress, if you can see that the coefficient on total factor productivity, which is circled, for the period 95-98 is 0.037, and it becomes less than half in the period 2015-2017. So meaning that basically firms, for the same positive productivity shock, responds in terms of demanding labor force half of the way they used to be in the previous period. So again, responsiveness is becoming slower. Now we go further and we check whether whether this is related to the size of the firms, and it's true. The responsiveness is actually decreasing, and this is the set of regression results that we have on TFP-RIT for small, medium, and large. You can see that you can see that in this chart, in this table, the coefficient actually is decreasing the more we go into large firms. So the large firms are the ones that are responding less in terms of creating employment. Now, the final thing we do is we check whether this is possibly due to issue of market power. Yes, allowing markups to vary between firms, we show that product or labor market power are the factor able to explain the negative relation between responsiveness on employment and firm size. Okay, so what are the conclusions on this? Innovation is crucial for every economy because it fuels growth, with the theme that actually Linnea was just drawing right now. The decline in business dynamism is worrisome since particularly young firms are those who drive innovation, and those young firms are becoming less important in terms of creating employment. Anti-competitive behavior could be one issue. We are looking into that. We have shown some initial results for Germany, the data that I show you for Germany, but we are currently extending to the whole EU this analysis to check whether product market power and monopoly power are driving the decline in business dynamism. Okay, final note. I have illustrated the component and the more granular MDI dataset that can provide some of best dataset for policy and research works in the EU. I show you our work on convergence, intangible, and business dynamism. This is just 3 of infinite examples of analysis that we can do by using this dataset. So it would be just great to extend the same approach to Ukraine. I'll thank you very much for your attention. And again, looking forward, continuous collaboration with all the colleagues of Ukraine. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Filippo. So I think the last message is a good bad news. It's easier to catch up with somebody who can't run. So if old Europe trends are starting to go down, then it's going to be a little bit easier to run convergence. But that's still a bad news because we all become somehow poorer. So are there perhaps, I would say, let's split the questions into categories. So, categories related perhaps to data arrangement, and then categories related directly to what Filippo was talking about in terms of research. So let's start with the research category. Maybe there's any comments or questions from my colleagues. Please go ahead and ask.
And turn your screen, turn your camera on. I would love to be with you there.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, for some of our colleagues are having limited bandwidth under different conditions. So unfortunately, it's not much of a choice.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
No problem.
So while they're thinking of this, actually, Filippo, the last thing you showed is the paper that I'm supposed to be discussing in Luxembourg, and one of them comes extremely timely. So I'm just wondering about this reaction to the labor part. Large firms usually tend to be also more capital intensive. Is this perhaps one of the margins of adjustment is simply higher capital intensity or something related to that? And this is going to be the first question I'm going to ask in the discussion, because Decker and most of them don't really look at this potential capital adjustment intensity. So
okay, actually there is also Sergio Ferrero, who is a co-author of this paper, so he can also take play. But let's take some other
yeah,
questions.
Sounds good. So Andri, go ahead. I see you have your raised hand.
Not turning my camera on. I don't have one at the office.
No problem.
My question is, well, my idea would be that there is some kind of correlation between the labor adjustment and the age structure of population in a certain country. So, I mean, if we have the tendency for aging of population, maybe the tendency, the trend for labor adjustment will be going down. Did you try to look into that factor? Thank you.
Okay, I understand. Okay, so actually I have Javi Miranda, which is a co-author of the paper that I just presented on business dynamism, that is in the audience, I understand. So Javi, maybe you can take the floor to respond to the two questions which are related to your paper, actually.
Yeah,
so
for
Javi.
Sure. Yeah,
thanks, Javi.
For sure, it's great to be with you guys. Really looking forward to collaborating in some ways moving forward. So Minea, thank you for looking forward to the discussion. and so what's the issue with capital? You're right. It is possible that companies, instead, as they receive a positive productivity shock, right? It is possible that instead of hiring more workers, they invest in more machines, right? So they replace workers with machines. So that's something that concerned us a lot in our research with the US data. And we did a lot of robustness checks on this particular question with the US data. What we showed with those data is that indeed what's happening is that responsiveness in terms of investment in workers, if you want to say it that way, and investment in machines move in exactly the same way. So the slowdown in investments, whether human capital or machines, are happening at the same time. So the slowdown is not a replacement effect, moving away from capital into workers. In fact, these companies are in general all slowing down. So Filippo said it exactly right. It appears that our economies, not just the European economy, but the US economy as well, are are slowing down and are not able to respond as much, again, in response to a productivity shock, whether positive or negative, by the way. So it's not just that businesses that are facing a positive revenue environment, that they're selling more. It's not just that those firms are less responsive. It's true also of firms that are not doing as well, right? They're not sharing workers as much. So everything is slowing down. On the question of aging, that's also an interesting. So hopefully that gives you a sense, Mine, of what's going on. I should say one more thing. This is true also of traditional sectors. It's particularly true in high-tech sectors. Okay, there's a little bit of replacement of individuals with capital in non-high-tech manufacturing, but not enough, not nearly enough to explain the slowdown that we see. And just very quickly, I don't want, we could keep talking about these things forever. But in terms of the aging of the population, it is true that the aging of the population can naturally lead to a slowdown in business dynamism. And in fact, there are some papers that are looking at this in the US. And you might expect this to be particularly important for the startup phenomenon, right? For starting new firms. So Ben Paxley, I have not done research in this area, but Ben Paxley has done quite a bit of work in this area. And what we think is that the aging of the population in the US can explain maybe 20% of a slowdown that we see in our economies. So certainly the aging of the population has something to do with it, apparently. But also, frictions, right? Market frictions, market power, declines in knowledge diffusion. All of these things are possible explanations, and there's a lot of active research trying to figure out exactly how to quantify all these different aspects. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, many thanks. So Anton is actually just wrote in the chat a question that very much goes into this knowledge spillover in more detail, and he's asking if there's a way to assess if domestic innovations versus important innovations might be playing a role. So is there something that was maybe, internationally it was easier to adopt certain technologies before and it's perhaps more complicated now, or could there be a national innovation policy dimension to this question?
Yeah, this is a good question, right? And it's something that Filippo might be able to speak a little bit more about than I can. I've not worked with the European data when it comes to the patent data or the intangibles aspect of innovation. But this is certainly something that could be. I think that we have the data to explore. The knowledge diffusion and the use of patent innovations and the licensing of patent innovations is something that certainly speaks to this phenomenon, but something that still there's a lot of research to be done. And maybe I'll let Filippo expand on that.
Yeah, in the MDI, we have in this more granular data set, we have investigated this international connection, and we have quite a bit of data that we are actually currently analyzing, specifying, what kind of internationalization is taking place, right? What kind of functions has been exported and so on. we are still looking into the data. It's a very complicated data set, but this is obviously a very important direction, particularly if we look into the disruption of the value chains right now. This, of course, would be something that would be very important to have more grasp on. But one thing, Minea, I wanted to check, because we are maybe getting out of time. So I think we need to devote before we close on two things. First, understanding on the Ukraine point of view, what kind of data you actually currently use, firm level data you use, and the way you could in a sense join our project. And the second thing is to think about collaboration. So I think why don't we spend a few minutes thinking about the way forward.
Yeah, so I think some of my colleagues have tried to use some firm level data to assess productivity, and this was primarily to look for aggregate applications to look at TFP. We've had some challenges with this with the capital data on how capital is measured and the accounting and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I haven't worked directly with this, and I don't know if the colleagues who did are here. We have other applications which focus more on the financial friction side. So I think there we have relatively detailed information on borrowing type, length, and so on and so forth. So it's short-term versus long-term and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, we don't have a lot of, so we have some demographics on these firms, industry, location, etc. But there's very limited information on a lot of their real factors, employment and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So some applications were tried out there, but primarily from the financial stability point of view, trying to look at which maybe industries are more leveraged, how spread out this leverage is by firm size, and so on and so forth. So, and this was also the reason why I thought it would be very good if you guys present what's being done with this type of data. We don't have so much data as the typical central bank would have. So this we rely in a certain sense on the National Statistics Office to a certain degree for certain types of data, and here it's always a little bit case by case. So I think some of my colleagues have asked for some data and received some of that data might not be existing. So it's less transparent in this respect than even we would be able to say, right? So.
But do you have a business register, correct? Of
Yes,
firm business register, so balance sheet data should be basically available, right?
Some of it, yeah.
In principle, something like running codes on without us or you having access to or anonymize the data, this could be possible, isn't it?
Yes, in principle, I think this should work.
Mm-hmm.
And this is definitely something we're going to follow up and ask if there is capacity also, because the big question we have is if we have the research and analysis capacity to do this.
Yeah.
But I think definitely going forward, especially on questions of drivers of productivity, why some countries in Central Eastern Europe, why some industries in Central Eastern Europe were catching up in productivity so well, others less. I think those are very important avenues to explore.
Actually, for your information, Minea colleagues, we would like to inform you that we will be starting as Compenet in the next few days a big project with the European Commission, DG Reform, which will be basically aim at improving the microdata foundation of policy and research analysis of productivity boards in Europe. So that's going to be a big, flagship sort of. We'll be announcing almost, sure officially at our next conference. So it's something going on in Europe on that. So firm level, information is something that the Commission puts a lot of emphasis on. So we really encourage you to think about and to trust that we can collaborate and help you out on that. Right?
Yeah, I mean, this was very useful because I think many of my colleagues maybe didn't know exactly what this is or what type of research is done. So, I think now we have slowly diffusion of knowledge in our in our departments, and then depending on priorities and as mentioned, on capacity, I think some of these things are going to become extremely important also in our case.
No, in fact, actually, one thing that I want to add is that in this program of the Commission, there is a lot of training sort of related, right? So I could see easily that some of your staff could join this training that we are going to do anyway for the productivity boards in Europe, related to the, on the statistical front, setting up the data sets in the right fashion to allow the comparability across countries. On the other hand, using these data sets in a proper fashion, because we know that microinformation cannot be used all the time, and we should be careful, right? So I think there are two issues, sort of the data preparation and data use, for which we could provide some training. We'll be happy to do that.
And maybe I can ask a quick question. And then maybe I'll introduce myself. So my name is Javier Miranda. I'm the head of the IWH ComNet at the Halle Institute for Economic Research, where ComNet is based. And I'm a principal economist there. And, it's just great to see, for us to talk and to start thinking about, how we can track the Ukrainian economy moving forward and vis-a-vis the rest of the European economies. Certainly, as we think about the reconstruction, right, that'll be really, really important. But I also just have a question about, so I mean, anything that we can do to get ahead, right, and to start pushing forward on this, it's just amazing. In our, we think. But also, I'm curious to know how your statistical system and data collection is being affected by the war and the aggression from Russia. And maybe you can expand a little bit about your capacities there in terms of current data collections.
Yeah, do we have any colleagues from statistics?
No, I can comment.
Very good, thanks.
I mean, the question, we have nothing. So under martial law, companies should not report to state statistical office. So there is no information at all. So only what we have, it's statistics and prices, I think. But what concerns to National Bank, we still have statistics which our banks are submitting to the National Bank. There are some losses, of course, because the frequency of statistics is not so frequent, but still we have data from financial institutions.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. I can imagine the situation is very difficult, so it's understandable that you're not collecting data.
Good, many thanks. Any further closing remarks, questions?
Maybe
not,
just a short comment. How do you you just take information from open sources, or you have some cooperation with statistical offices?
No, exactly. Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Lepushinsky. Sorry if I wasn't clear in my presentation before. Absolutely not. We do not have access direct to the data. So basically what we have, our data provider, say the Bank of Ukraine as a data provider, would run our codes on their own data, which could be, say, in your own vaults or the data that you are getting from the statistical institutes, but we will not see the data, the raw data. So we will be getting from you only the aggregated information. So therefore, there are no confidentiality issues involved anymore. So that's why we can. In general, what we have been doing is the project, like 10, 12 years ago, started with the central banks, research departments like you, and their own. So the data in general were coming from the central banks. But in the last few years, we have been increasing the numbers of actually national statistical institutes that were providing the data, but with the same regime. So we don't see the raw data, but the counterparts at the national level try to get the best data available, to run the common codes for the countries involved. I hope I respond to your question, sir.
Yeah, but for doing this, you need to have like special agreement with them, or
no, not really, because basically what we do is both our codes kind of are constructed in such a fashion to avoid any confidentiality issues. So, for instance, if there are sort of just a few firms into, a set of in the codes within a sector, say, the codes will not produce the data. So there are not really agreements that we write, but we kind of provide the codes, and the national statistical institutes run the codes, and they return to us just aggregated information, which loses their confidentiality, therefore. Now, the advantage of the statistical institutes to participate is that they can have at their disposal the data in aggregate format, which are generated for other countries. So if Ukraine takes part of this project, you will able to have, with no restriction, access to the data aggregated of the other countries participating, and therefore you can use it for comparative work, research, and so on.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Sure.
And maybe just to add, sometimes there might be, in general, we rely on agreements, collaborations, right? But sometimes, like in the US, the legal framework requires a little bit more of an agreement, but it's we try to work in a way that is more collaborative.
Of course, I mean, if in the future you like to enter in a collaboration with us, and for your own purposes you need a more formal agreement, there is no problem for us to write down. We have a legal office in the IWH that can help us out to do it very easily. So no problem whatsoever, sir, on that.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Yeah, just basically we work with whatever legal framework the country has in place.
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Many thanks. Yeah, I think we are drawing close to the end. If there's no further questions, maybe, or comments.
Yeah, the comment is that it was just a joy to be with you. I'm actually moved by the invitation, and by being with you today. And again, my full solidarity also on behalf of the entire company team. And a wish, very strong wish, that this is just the beginning of a conversation with you. As soon as, and we hope very, very soon, things will improve in your country. I wish you all the best to you and your families. Thank you very much for having us today. Thanks, Minia.
Many thanks on my behalf of my colleagues as well, Filippo and Javier, and hope we can stay in touch.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Have a nice day. See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.